prop. Starting sequence now.
Clear on the left.
December 12, 1944. 08 and 47 hours. Lechfeld Airfield, Bavaria. Hans Verner's hands don't shake as he signs the flight log. They should. Every pilot at Lechfeld knows the statistics: 1 in 3 test flights ends in mechanical failure. 1 in 5 ends with the pilot dead. But Verner's hands are steady because steadiness is the only currency that matters when your country is losing, and your government would rather burn its secrets than let them fall into enemy hands. He's 31. Old for a combat pilot, young for a test pilot, with 247 hours in his logbook. He's flown the Me-262 when it was still called Project 165, back when Messerschmitt engineers whispered about jet propulsion like it was black magic.
Then we hit them.
He's survived the He-162 Volksjäger, the people's fighter, built by slave labor, and held together with wood glue because the Reich ran out of aluminum in 1943. He's tested prototypes that never got names, just numbers, because they killed their pilots before reaching production. Today he's flying a Bf-109 G-14. 17 kills painted under the cockpit, none of them his. Hartmann, the ground crew chief, watches him approach the aircraft. Hartmann lost his left arm at Stalingrad. Now he supervises repairs with a clipboard tucked under his remaining elbow and contempt in his eyes for every order that comes down from Berlin. "Fuel status?" Verner asks. "Enough for 2 hours if you don't push her." Hartmann doesn't look up. "Port tank's leaking. We patched it. I wouldn't trust it above 4,000 meters. And if I need to go higher, then you'll crash. But you'll crash anyway if you keep flying these death traps." Hartmann finally meets his eyes. "The war's over, Hans. We lost. The only question is how many more of us have to die before someone in Berlin admits it." Verner doesn't answer. Answering gets you shot. Instead, he climbs into the cockpit. The seat is still warm. The previous pilot flew 2 hours ago. A kid named Brenner, 19 years old, who vomited before every flight and crossed himself like a Catholic, even though the Reich officially banned religious displays. Brenner's flying a reconnaissance mission over France right now. Even odds he makes it back. Verner straps in. The oxygen mask smells like rubber and fear. Someone else's fear baked into the fabric over hundreds of hours. The instrument panel is a graveyard of scavenged parts German gauges, mixed with Soviet ones pulled from crashed yaks. Even one American altimeter that somehow survived being shot down over Hamburg. Nothing matches. Nothing works correctly. But everything works well enough to get you killed. He runs through the pre-flight check. Magnetos functioning, fuel pressure adequate. Oil temperature high but acceptable. Control surfaces responsive. The DB605 engine coughs black smoke when he starts it, burning through synthetic fuel that corrodes seals and fouls spark plugs. By 1945, the Luftwaffe is flying on chemistry and prayers. 0847 hours. Cleared for takeoff. The Bf-109 accelerates down Lechfeld's western runway. The eastern runway is cratered from last week's American bombing raid. Verner rotates at 140 kilometers per hour, feeling the tail lift, feeling the familiar transition from ground to sky. For a moment, nothing else matters. Not the war, not the leaking fuel tank, not the knowledge that Germany is collapsing like a building with its foundation removed. For a moment, there's only airspeed and altitude, and the pure mechanical truth of flight. He climbs to 3,500 meters. Below, Bavaria spreads out in winter whites and grays forests, stripped bare fields, frozen roads, carved by tank treads and artillery craters. No other aircraft in the sky. No friendly fighters. No enemy bombers. Just empty air and the drone of a 12-cylinder engine burning toward failure. For 40 minutes, Verner conducts his tests. Throttle response at various altitudes. Engine temperature under sustained climb. Control surface effectiveness in cold air. He fills out the test card clipped to his knee, recording numbers that someone in Berlin will file and forget. The fuel injection system works adequately, which means it will fail catastrophically, within another 100 hours. But that's tomorrow's problem. 0932 hours. Crossing near Augsburg. The engine dies. Not dramatically. No explosion. No fireball. Just a metallic clunk, like someone closing a door, and then silence. The propeller windmills uselessly. Oil temperature spikes. The aircraft transforms from predator to falling metal. Werner's stomach drops before his brain processes what happened. He's trained for this. Every test pilot trains for this. But training and reality are separated by the width of a heartbeat and the knowledge that the ground is 500 meters below and getting closer at 600 meters per minute. Mixture off. Magnetos off. Fuel off. Trim for best glide. His hands move through the emergency procedures automatically. His mind races ahead, calculating angles and distances and probabilities. He has maybe 15 minutes of controlled flight before he's walking. The question is where? East Lechfeld Airfield, 30 kilometers. Too far. The mathematics are brutal and unforgiving. From 500 meters gliding at a 10:1 ratio, he can travel 35 kilometers maximum. But Lechfeld is northeast, and the wind is westerly, and the numbers don't work. He might reach Munich's outskirts, but even that requires perfect conditions and divine intervention. And Werner stopped believing in divine intervention around the time he watched the Gestapo shoot 3 engineers for defeatist talk. West American lines. Advancing daily. Unmarked. Lethal if you land wrong, imprisoned if you land right. Werner thinks about the Me-262 he watched burn near the Swiss border. He'd been forced down with engine failure. The turbines couldn't handle sustained high-altitude flight, a problem Messerschmitt knew about but couldn't solve because all the good metallurgists were dead or conscripted into infantry. The Wehrmacht sent a recovery team. Not to retrieve Werner. To destroy the aircraft. He stood in a farmhouse and watched German soldiers pour gasoline over a perfectly repairable jet fighter and set it ablaze because the Reich valued its secrets more than its pilots. He thinks about Hartmann's missing arm. About Brenner vomiting before flights. About 17 dead pilots whose kills he's been flying with. He thinks I will not die for a regime that burns its own aircraft to hide its failures. 0947 hours. 200 meters altitude. Werner banks west. The decision is made before conscious thought catches up. His hand moves the stick left his feet, work the rudder, and suddenly he's gliding toward enemy territory with an absolutely clarity that feels like the first honest choice he's made in 5 years. The landscape below shifts. German farmland gives way to contested zones, burned vehicles, cratered roads, villages reduced to skeletal walls. He can see the evidence of recent fighting, the scars of armies tearing through civilization like dogs fighting over a corpse. At 800 meters, he spots what he needs. American armor moving north along a highway. Sherman tanks, half-track supply trucks marked with white stars. 9 vehicles. Tactical spacing. Disciplined formation. This isn't a patrol. This is a full company organized and professional. Werner extends his landing gear manually, cranking the emergency handle. The wheels lock down with solid clunks. He selects a field adjacent to the highway flat, snow-covered, no obvious obstacles. The ground fills his windscreen. Airspeed 180 kph. Altitude 100 meters. 50 meters. He pulls back, flaring. The Bf-109 touches down at 0954 hours on American-occupied soil. The landing is smooth. Almost insultingly smooth for such a momentous act of surrender. Snow sprays from the wheels. The aircraft rolls 200 meters and stops nose pointed west toward a future Werner can't even imagine. He sits in the cockpit for 30 seconds. The silence is absolute. No engine noise, no radio chatter, just wind and his own breathing and the distant rumble of American tanks repositioning. Then he unbuckles, opens the canopy, and stands on the wing with his hands above his head. The Americans arrive faster than expected. 3 soldiers approach on foot, weapons raised but not aimed directly. They wear winter camouflage and move with casual confidence, men far from the front lines, men who aren't expecting trouble. Sprechen Sie English? One calls out. Yes. Werner keeps his hands visible. I am Luftwaffe test pilot. Engine failure. I surrender aircraft and myself. The soldiers exchange glances. One starts photographing the Bf-109 from multiple angles, moving around it with professional efficiency. The other, apparently the ranking NCO, lowers his Thompson and approaches. Name and rank: Werner, Hans Verner, Oberleutnant, serial number 4752B. He pauses. I am test pilot, not combat pilot. Test pilot. The NCO's eyebrow rises. For what? All aircraft. Me-262. He-162. New designs. I have flown all Luftwaffe types. Something changes in the NCO's expression. Suspicion shifts to interest. He slings his weapon. Don't move. Don't touch anything. You're about to have a very long conversation. Within an hour, Werner is sitting in a heated tent at a forward operations base drinking American coffee that tastes like burnt motor oil and answering questions from a captain whose German is adequate but uninspired. The interrogation is polite, almost collegial. They ask about his aircraft's capabilities, its weaknesses, maintenance requirements. They ask about other aircraft he's flown. They ask if the Me-262 is as fast as intelligence suggests. Werner answers truthfully. There's no point in deception. The war is over for him. Has been over since the moment he banked west. Germany will lose. The only question is how many more pilots die before the inevitable conclusion. At 18:30 hours, a jeep arrives. Two officers emerge. One is a full Colonel Air Corps insignia on his uniform-weathered face of someone who's spent years in cockpits. The other is a major with intelligence branch markings and calculating eyes that evaluate Werner like he's an aircraft being considered for purchase. The colonel speaks first in fluent German with a Berlin accent. Herr Werner, I'm Colonel Douglas. This is Major Kemp. We've verified your identity through captured records. You're not exaggerating your experience. If anything, you're understating it. Werner sets down his coffee cup and waits. You've logged more hours on advanced German aircraft than possibly any pilot alive, Douglas continues, which creates an unusual opportunity. I am listening. We're very interested in understanding Luftwaffe aircraft from a pilot's perspective, not engineering analysis, actual flight characteristics, handling, performance, tactical applications. Werner nods slowly. You wish detailed descriptions? No, Major Kemp interrupts. We want you to fly our aircraft and tell us how they compare. The tent falls silent except for distant generators. Werner stares at them, certain he's misunderstood the English. You want I should fly American aircraft? Exactly, Douglas confirms. Under controlled conditions. Constant supervision. Wright Field in Ohio. You'd help us understand tactical advantages and disadvantages our pilots face against Luftwaffe equipment. This is not standard for prisoners. You're correct. This is not standard at all, which is why it requires your voluntary cooperation and your word as an officer that you won't attempt escape or sabotage. Werner looks down at his hands. Pilot's hands. Scarred from throttles and control sticks. Calloused from thousands of hours manipulating machinery designed to kill. Hands that might never fly again if he refuses this impossible offer. If I agree, he asks carefully, what happens after Major Kemp exchanges a glance with Douglas? That depends on many factors. How the war concludes, what you choose to do with the knowledge you gain. But I can tell you this, pilots who help us understand the air war don't end up in standard POW camps. It's not a promise, barely even a suggestion. But Werner has survived 5 years of war by reading subtext beneath official statements. The Americans are offering him something his own nation never provided: value for knowledge, not for dying. I will cooperate, Werner says. On my word as a pilot. Douglas extends his hand. Verner shakes it, feeling the surreal absurdity enemy officers, concluding a deal that would get him executed if the Gestapo ever learned. The transport north begins the next morning. Verner rides in a covered truck, guarded but not shackled, watching Germany recede through canvas flaps. They cross into France, then to a port where a military transport waits. The ocean crossing takes 8 days through winter storms. January 4th, 1945. Wright Field, Ohio. The base sprawls across thousands of acres. Hangars housing captured enemy aircraft and experimental prototypes that look like they arrived from the future. Security is absolute. But what strikes Verner most isn't security or technology. It's abundance. Parts are plentiful. Fuel is unlimited. Mechanics work with proper tools, not improvised solutions. Aircraft are maintained to standards that would be considered excessive luxury in Germany. This isn't a nation losing a war. This is a nation that hasn't even begun to strain. His escort delivers him to an office building where he meets Lieutenant Colonel Harold Watson. Watson is 32, barely older than Verner. Test pilot's economy of movement. Engineer's analytical gaze. He'd flown P-38s in combat before being reassigned to experimental flight testing. His handshake is firm without confrontation. Herr Verner, welcome to Wright Field. I understand you've agreed to our evaluation program. This is correct, Colonel Watson. Good. Ground rules. First, you're never alone with any aircraft. Second, every flight is logged, recorded, observed. Third, detailed debriefs after each flight. Fourth, any deviation from approved flight plans results in immediate termination and transfer to standard POW facility. Acceptable. Acceptable. Watson nods, then smiles. Excellent. Because I'm genuinely curious about your perspective. I've read intelligence reports, but reports don't tell me what it feels like to fly a Me-262 at maximum speed. You know things we need to understand. And honestly, I think you're going to find our aircraft very interesting. For 3 weeks, Verner undergoes intensive debriefing. Intelligence officers catalog everything he knows about Luftwaffe development. Engineers present technical drawings, ask him to identify inaccuracies. Analysts question him about fuel compositions, maintenance cycles, training protocols. He answers completely. There's no strategic value in deception. The information is historical, describing aircraft and systems the Americans will capture regardless. But more importantly, Verner discovers something unexpected. The Americans ask better questions than his German superiors ever did. They want to know about failure modes. What breaks first under stress? Human factors that make certain designs difficult to operate. Visibility from the cockpit. Control force requirements. How cold affects different materials. These are questions from people who actually fly aircraft and actually intend to learn from enemy experience. January 28, 1945, 0600 hours. Watson appears at Verner's quarters. Get dressed in flight gear. Today you're flying a P-51. The P-51 Mustang sits on Wright Field's test ramp, bearing only the designation FT-471, Flight Test 471. It's a D model, the long-range variant that escorted American bombers into Germany and methodically destroyed what remained of the Luftwaffe. Verner has seen P-51s before, usually diving at speeds his Bf-109 couldn't match. He never imagined sitting in one. Watson conducts the briefing personally. Basic handling. Takeoff climb to 10,000 feet. Level flight. Gentle turns landing. I'll fly chase in another Mustang. Radio monitored. Clear. Clear, Colonel. Then let's see what a Luftwaffe test pilot thinks of American engineering. Verner approaches the P-51 with careful attention. The fuselage is broader than a Bf-109's. Cockpit set further aft. The bubble canopy provides visibility that seems impossible. No blind spots, no obstructed views. He runs his hand along the wing's leading edge, feeling the laminar flow profile that gives the Mustang its speed. The ground crew helps him strap in. Americans watching with undisguised curiosity as a German pilot prepares to fly their most successful fighter. Verner conducts checks methodically. The instruments are clearly labeled, logically arranged. The throttle moves smoothly. The fuel system is simple, elegant, reliable. Everything the Luftwaffe isn't. 0847 hours. Exactly 1 month after his engine failure over Bavaria. Verner advances the throttle. The Packard-built Merlin engine surges with power that seems impossible. The acceleration pins him to his seat. The aircraft lifts off after barely 600 meters, climbing at angles that would stall a Bf-109. For 40 minutes, Verner explores American aviation philosophy made manifest. The P-51 isn't just well-engineered, it's completely engineered. Designed assuming proper maintenance will always be available. That spare parts will never run short. That pilots deserve aircraft that work correctly every single time. He tests the controls. Responsive without being twitchy. He pushes the engine. Smooth power delivery across the entire RPM range. He checks visibility. Perfect. He evaluates the fuel system. Elegant simplicity. This isn't a better aircraft. This is a better philosophy. When he lands, Watson is waiting at the hardstand, stopwatch in hand. Assessment. Verner unbuckles slowly, gathering thoughts in English. Your aircraft is not better because of one thing. It is better because of everything. Engine, fuel system, visibility, controls, each is excellent, and together they are superior. He pauses, searching for the right words. But more important, you have solved problems we did not know we had. Watson's smile is knowing. That's going in my report word for word. He extends his hand. Verner shakes it, knowing every second he spends here is treason by German law. Somewhere in Bavaria, his name is already on an execution list. But here in Ohio, he's not a traitor. He's a pilot. And for the first time in 5 years, that's enough. The next morning, Watson arrives with a clipboard and a cup of coffee that Verner has learned not to refuse, no matter how terrible it tastes. P-38 Lightning today, Watson says. Twin engine, twin boom. Completely different handling characteristics from anything you've flown. Verner looks up from the technical manual he's been studying. The fork-tailed devil. This is what your pilots called it. That's what your pilots called it. Ours just call it the Lightning. Watson sets down a stack of photographs. These are gun camera footage from P-38s engaging Bf-109s over France. I want you to watch them and tell me what the German pilots are doing wrong. Verner spreads the photographs across the table. Each one captures the final seconds of a Luftwaffe aircraft smoke, trailing control surfaces damaged the moment before death. He recognizes the tactical errors immediately. Predictable evasion patterns. Failure to exploit the Bf-109's superior roll rate. Over-reliance on dive speed when the American aircraft could simply outturn them. They are flying like it is 1940. Verner says quietly. Like they still have fuel for training. Like they still have experienced instructors teaching proper tactics. And do they? No. By 1943, we were sending pilots into combat with 40 hours of flight time. The Americans they faced had 200 hours. It was not a war anymore. It was murder. Watson doesn't respond immediately. He pulls out a chair and sits across from Verner. Is that why you landed in that field? Because you knew it was murder. Verner meets his eyes. I landed in that field because I watched my own country burn and Me-262, rather than let it be captured intact. I realized then that the Reich valued its secrets more than its people. And I decided I would rather be valuable to someone than dead for nothing. That's honest. Honesty is all I have left, Colonel. Watson nods slowly, then stands. The P-38 is waiting. Let's see if you can figure out why your pilots feared it so much. The P-38 Lightning sits on the flight line like something from a science fiction magazine. Twin. Allison engines. Twin booms, a central nacelle that looks too small to hold a pilot. Verner circles it slowly, noting the design philosophy. The Americans didn't try to make the most aerodynamic fighter. They made the most practical one-tricycle landing gear for easier takeoffs, twin engines for redundancy, heavy armament concentrated in the nose for devastating firepower. Counter-rotating propellers, Watson explains. No torque effect on takeoff. Makes it easier to fly, especially for less experienced pilots. Verner understands immediately. The Germans designed aircraft for experts. The Americans designed aircraft that turned average pilots into effective ones. It's the difference between a nation fighting for survival and a nation fighting with industrial logic. The flight lasts 50 minutes. The P-38 handles nothing like a Bf-109. It's heavier, less nimble in a dogfight, but devastatingly effective in every other way. The visibility is spectacular. The engines provide redundancy that German single-engine fighters never had. The firepower, 4 50 caliber machine guns and one 20mm cannon, all nose-mounted, would shred any aircraft Verner has ever flown. When he lands, Watson is already writing notes. It is not a dogfighter, Verner says as he climbs down. But it does not need to be. It is faster than our fighters below 6,000 meters. It can dive away from any engagement. And the firepower means it only needs one good pass to kill. That's exactly right. Watson taps his pencil against the clipboard. The Luftwaffe kept trying to out-dogfight us. But we built aircraft that didn't need to dogfight. You built aircraft for the war you were fighting. We built aircraft for the war we wished we were fighting. Over the next 6 weeks, Verner flies 13 different American aircraft. P-47 Thunderbolt, massive heavy nearly indestructible. P-61 Black Widow, a night fighter with radar that seems like magic. Even an experimental P-80 shooting star jet that makes the Me-262 feel like a museum piece. Each flight comes with extensive debriefing. Watson asks questions that reveal he's not just a pilot, but an engineer who understands systems thinking. He wants to know about maintenance requirements, pilot workload, visibility during combat maneuvers. He takes notes in shorthand, occasionally stopping to ask Verner to clarify technical terminology. But it's during the evening sessions in Watson's office that the real education happens. February 15, 1945. Watson spreads a map of Europe across his desk. We've been getting reports, he says, that the Luftwaffe is concentrating jet fighters around Berlin, Me-262s specifically. Intelligence thinks Hitler is planning a last-ditch air superiority campaign. Verner studies the map. It will not work. Why? Because the Me-262 has a fatal weakness that no one in Berlin wants to acknowledge. Verner points to the jet's specifications written in the margin. The Jumo 004 engines last 70 hours before catastrophic failure. 70 hours, Colonel. Your Merlin engines last 700 hours, and we do not have the industrial capacity to manufacture replacements fast enough. Watson leans back in his chair. So even if Hitler concentrates every Me-262 he has, they will destroy themselves through mechanical failure before your bombers destroy them through combat. Verner's voice is flat. This is what I tried to tell the engineers at Messerschmitt in 1944. They told me I was being defeatist. 2 weeks later, the Gestapo arrested 3 engineers for undermining morale. I stopped giving recommendations after that. Jesus. No, not Jesus, just bureaucracy and terror. Verner looks up from the map. Your country has many advantages, Colonel. But the greatest is this: your engineers can tell the truth without being executed. Watson is quiet for a long moment. Sa'sid. Then he pulls out a bottle of bourbon from his desk drawer and pours 2 glasses. To telling the truth, he says, raising his glass. Verner raises his own. To surviving long enough to tell it. They drink. The bourbon burns, but it's a clean burn, nothing like the potato vodka that circulated through Luftwaffe bases near the end. Everything in America is like this Verner is learning. Abundant. Functional. Designed with the assumption that supply chains will never break down. I have a question, Verner says after his second glass. Why are you doing this? I am your enemy. I flew for the Reich. I tested weapons designed to kill American pilots. Why teach me about your aircraft? Why trust me with this information? Watson doesn't answer immediately. He refills both glasses. Because the war is almost over, he finally says. And when it's over, we're going to need people who understand both sides. The Russians are already grabbing every German scientist they can find. We're doing the same. It's not about loyalty to countries anymore. It's about knowledge. And what happens to me when the war ends? That depends. Watson meets his eyes. On whether you want to keep flying or go home to whatever's left of Germany. Verner thinks about Lechfeld Airfield, about Hartmann with his missing arm and clipboard, about Brenner vomiting before flights, about 17 dead pilots whose kills are painted on aircraft they'll never fly again. I do not think there is anything left to go home to, he says quietly. Watson nods. Then we'll figure out what comes next when the time comes. March 1945. The news from Europe arrives in fragments. The Rhine crossed. Hamburg bombed into rubble. Soviet forces encircling Berlin. Each report confirms what Verner has known since December: the Reich is dying, and it's dying ugly. But at Wright Field, the work continues. Verner is no longer just a test pilot. He's become something else. A technical consultant, a cultural bridge, a living database of Luftwaffe knowledge. Engineers seek him out to ask about German metallurgy. Intelligence officers want tactical assessments. Other test pilots ask him to demonstrate German flying techniques. He's valuable. And being valuable, he discovers, is better than being loyal to a nation that would have burned him alive to protect its secrets. One afternoon, Watson brings him to a secure hangar on the far side of the base. We've got something special, Watson says, just arrived from Europe. Inside the hangar sits an Me-262 intact and gleaming under fluorescent lights. American mechanics are swarming over it, measuring every component, photographing every detail. Verner's breath catches. He hasn't seen an Me-262 since December. Looking at it now feels like seeing a ghost, beautiful, deadly, and utterly obsolete. We want you to fly it, Watson says. Against our jets. Comparative evaluation. You want me to fight American pilots? No, I want you to show us what this aircraft can do so we can design better ones. Watson hands him a flight suit. The war's over, Hans. This isn't about winning anymore. It's about understanding. The flight happens 3 days later. Verner takes the Me-262 up against a P-80 Shooting Star flown by Captain Richard Becker, a combat veteran with 14 kills over Germany. The engagement lasts 12 minutes. The Me-262 is faster in level flight. But the P-80 accelerates better, turns tighter, and doesn't threaten to blow its engines during high-G maneuvers. By the 6th minute, Verner understands why the Luftwaffe lost. German engineering produced technological marvels that were too fragile for war. American engineering produced practical tools that worked every single time. After landing, Becker approaches with his hand extended. That was some flying, Becker says. You're good. Verner shakes his hand, feeling the strange reversal. 6 months ago, they would have been trying to kill each other. Now they're colleagues comparing notes on aircraft performance. The Me-262 is faster, Verner says, but your jet is better. How so? Because I can fly your jet knowing it will not explode. I cannot say the same about mine. Becker laughs. That's going in my report. April 1945. The news arrives on a Tuesday. Hitler is dead. Berlin has fallen. The Reich has surrendered unconditionally. Verner hears the announcement in the base commissary. Around him, American personnel celebrate. Cheering, hugging, some crying with relief. The war in Europe is over. Verner sits alone at a corner table drinking coffee and feeling nothing. Not relief, not grief, not even satisfaction. Just emptiness, where certainty used to be. Watson finds him an hour later. You okay? I do not know. Verner looks up. I have been at war since I was 26 years old. I do not know what peace feels like. Watson pulls out a chair and sits. None of us do. But we'll figure it out. What happens to me now, I am no longer an enemy combatant. But I am not American. I have no country to return to. That's what I came to talk to you about. Watson slides a folder across the table. We're offering you a position. Civil test pilot working under contract with the Army Air Forces. You'd continue evaluating captured German aircraft and helping us understand Soviet aviation doctrine. Verner opens the folder. Contract terms, salary, housing arrangements, visa documentation, everything official and legal and impossible. Why? He asks. Because you're the best test pilot I've ever worked with, and because the war ending doesn't mean the need for knowledge ends. Watson leans forward. The Soviets are already developing their own jet fighters based on German designs. We need people who understand both German and Russian aviation philosophy. You're one of maybe 5 people in the world with that knowledge. And if I refuse, then you go to a standard POW processing center, wait for repatriation protocols to be established, and eventually return to Germany. Watson pauses. To whatever's left of it. Verner looks down at the contract. 3 years. Renewable. Salary sufficient for comfortable living. Work that would let him keep flying. I accept, he says. Watson smiles. Good. Because we just got intelligence that the Soviets captured an entire Focke-Wulf factory intact, and I need you to tell me what they're going to do with it. Over the next 3 months, Verner transitions from prisoner to employee. He moves from supervised quarters to a small apartment off base. He opens a bank account. He buys American clothes that fit properly. He learns to navigate grocery stores that have more food than he's seen in 5 years. But the work remains the same. He flies captured German aircraft and provides detailed assessments. He reviews intelligence reports on Soviet aviation development. He teaches American pilots German tactics, not so they can replicate them, but so they can counter them. And slowly, without fully realizing it, he stops thinking of himself as German. He becomes something new, something without a country, but with a purpose. June 1945. Watson brings news over lunch. We're starting something called Operation Paperclip, he says. Recruiting German scientists and engineers to work in America. Rocket specialists mostly, but also aircraft designers, metallurgists, propulsion experts. And you want my recommendations? I want you to know that you weren't a special case. We're bringing over 200 specialists, maybe more. Watson pauses. You were just the first. Verner absorbs this information slowly. He thinks about the engineers at Messerschmitt who were arrested for telling the truth, about the scientists at Peenemünde developing rockets while slave laborers died building them, about an entire generation of German technical expertise that will now serve American interests. Is this justice? He asks. I don't know, Watson admits. But it's practical. And right now, practical matters more than just. That evening, Verner writes a letter to Hartmann at Lechfeld, assuming Lechfeld still exists, assuming Hartmann survived the war's final weeks. He doesn't know if the letter will ever arrive, but he writes it anyway. I am alive. I am flying. I am no longer fighting. If that makes me a traitor, then I am a traitor. But I would rather be a living traitor than a dead patriot. He never receives a response. But 3 months later, he learns that Hartmann did survive. He's working at a British airfield, helping restore captured Luftwaffe aircraft for museum display. The war scattered them like seeds, and wherever they landed, they grew into something new. By the winter of 1945, Verner has flown 42 different aircraft for the Americans. He's written over 300 pages of technical analysis. He's helped design training programs that teach American pilots how to counter German tactics. He's become, in Watson's words, the most valuable prisoner of war we never officially captured. And he's made peace with what that means. He didn't betray Germany. Germany betrayed itself, betrayed its pilots, its engineers, its people, by valuing ideology over truth. He simply chose to survive the betrayal rather than die for it. One December evening, exactly 1 year after his engine failed over Bavaria, Verner and Watson stand on the right field flight line, watching the sun set over rows of parked aircraft. "You ever regret it?" Watson asks, banking west instead of east. Verner considers the question carefully. "I regret that I had to choose, but I do not regret the choice I made." "That's honest." "Honesty is still all I have, Colonel." Watson claps him on the shoulder. "Then you have more than most people." They stand in silence as darkness settles over the airfield. Somewhere in the distance, an engine starts a test pilot beginning a night flight pushing against the darkness to find the limits of what's possible. It's the sound Verner has lived his entire adult life around. The sound of controlled fire and human ambition, and the stubborn refusal to accept that the ground is where we belong. And for the first time in 5 years, listening to that sound doesn't remind him of war. It reminds him of possibility. Even in surrender, even in defeat, even when everything you believed in burns to ash, there's still the sky. And the sky doesn't care about politics or loyalty or which flag you salute. The sky only cares if you're good enough to master it. Verner has spent his life trying to be good enough, and now finally someone values that skill for what it is rather than which nation it serves. That's not betrayal. That's survival. And survival, he's learning, is its own kind of victory. January 1946. The snow falls heavy over right field, covering the runways in white, that reminds Verner too much of Bavaria. He's been in America for exactly 1 year now, and the nightmares have finally started. They come at 3 in the morning, always the same. He's back in the Bf-109 engine, dead, falling toward Earth. But when he looks down, the field below isn't occupied by American tanks. It's covered in bodies, thousands of them, arranged in rows like aircraft on a flight line. He wakes up shaking, and for the first hour afterward, he can't remember if the bodies are real or invented by his subconscious. By February, he stops trying to distinguish between the two. Watson notices during a morning briefing. Verner's hand trembles as he marks altitude on a flight chart. "You sleeping?" Watson asks. "Enough." "That's not an answer." Verner sets down the pencil. "I am sleeping enough to fly safely. Is that sufficient?" Watson studies him for a long moment. "There's a doctor on base, Army psychiatrist. He works with combat pilots who've seen—" "I am not combat pilot." "No, but you've seen things combat pilots haven't." Watson slides a business card across the desk. "His name is Dr. Kellerman. He's discreet. And he's cleared to hear classified information, which means you can actually talk to him." Verner looks at the card without touching it. "And if I refuse?" "Then you keep having nightmares until they affect your flying, and then I have to ground you." Watson's voice is gentle but firm. "I'm not asking as your supervisor. I'm asking as someone who gives a damn whether you're okay." 2 days later, Verner sits in Dr. Kellerman's office, a small room with 2 chairs, no desk, and a window overlooking the flight line. Kellerman is 50-something, gray hair, wire-rimmed glasses, the kind of man who looks like he's heard everything and been surprised by nothing. "Colonel Watson tells me you're having nightmares," Kellerman says. "Yes." "About the war? About after the war?" Verner hesitates. "About things I saw that were not combat." Kellerman doesn't push. He waits. And in that waiting, Verner finds himself talking about things he hasn't spoken aloud since December 1944. He talks about the slave laborers at Messerschmitt factories, skeletal figures in striped uniforms assembling jet engines with hands that shook from starvation. He talks about the day he asked an engineer where the workers came from, and the engineer said, "Dachau, don't ask more questions." He talks about flying over Auschwitz in October 1944, a navigation training flight that took him over southern Poland. He'd seen the smoke from 8,000 meters visible even through clouds. He'd asked his instructor what was burning. The instructor had said, "Industrial facility, focus on your heading." He talks about the moment in December when he decided to surrender, not just because his engine failed, not just because Germany was losing, but because he'd realized he was part of something monstrous. Not directly, not personally, but through participation, through silence, through flying aircraft built by people who were being worked to death. "I did not kill anyone," Verner says, his voice barely above a whisper. "I was test pilot. I never fired weapons in combat. But I flew aircraft built on top of corpses, and I said nothing." Kellerman is quiet for a long time. When he finally speaks, his voice carries no judgment. "What could you have said? I do not know. But saying nothing feels like complicity. And that's why you can't sleep." "Yes." Kellerman leans forward slightly. "Hans, I can't absolve you. That's not my job. But I can tell you this, you're alive, and you chose to stop participating. That's more than most people in your position did. The question now is whether you're going to let guilt destroy the life you saved, or whether you're going to use that life for something meaningful." Verner looks out the window at the aircraft on the flight line. American fighters and bombers being maintained by mechanics who go home to families every evening. No slave labor, no starvation, no systematic murder hiding behind euphemisms like industrial facility. "I do not know if what I am doing is meaningful," he says. "Then let me tell you what Colonel Watson told me." Kellerman responds. "You've provided intelligence that's helped us understand Soviet aviation capabilities. That intelligence will help keep American pilots alive if there's another war. Is that meaningful enough?" It isn't, not really, but it's something. And something Verner is learning is better than the nothing he felt while flying for the Reich. The sessions with Kellerman continue weekly. They don't fix the nightmares. Nothing can fix them, but they make them manageable. Verner learns to recognize the triggers, certain smells, certain sounds, the sight of barbed wire. He learns to ground himself in present reality, rather than spiraling into guilt. And slowly, he begins to understand something crucial: he can't undo his complicity. But he can refuse to be complicit ever again. March 1946. Watson brings him a new assignment. "We're getting reports," Watson says, spreading photographs across the conference table, "that the Soviets are developing a new jet fighter based on German designs. We think it's derived from the Focke-Wulf Ta-183 prototype. We need to know what capabilities it might have." Verner studies the photographs. Grainy, taken from high altitude, but the aircraft's silhouette is unmistakable. Swept wings, single engine. The design philosophy is pure Kurt tank, aggressive, elegant, probably impossible to manufacture at scale. "The Ta-183 never flew," Verner says. "It was still in wind tunnel testing when the war ended. We know. But the Soviets captured the entire Focke-Wulf design bureau, including all the engineers." Watson taps one photograph. "If they've managed to make it flyable, we need to understand its performance envelope." "You want me to extrapolate performance from incomplete data?" "I want you to think like a German test pilot evaluating a Soviet-built German design. What would work? What would fail? What shortcuts would they take?" Verner pulls the photographs closer. It's a puzzle, and despite everything, he's still drawn to puzzles. Engineering doesn't care about politics. Aerodynamics don't recognize national boundaries. An aircraft either flies or it doesn't, and the physics are universal. He spends 3 weeks analyzing the TA-183 design documents that American forces captured in Germany. He consults with wind tunnel engineers. He builds scale models and tests them in Wright Field's aerodynamic facility. And gradually, he constructs a profile of what the Soviet version might be capable of. The report he delivers to Watson is 47 pages long, technical, and precise. But the conclusion is simple. The aircraft will be fast and maneuverable, but plagued by the same engine reliability issues that destroyed the Me-262 program. The Soviets inherited German innovation, but they also inherited German problems. "This is excellent work," Watson says after reading it. "But I need to ask you something. How does it feel analyzing aircraft for the side that defeated your country?" Verner considers the question carefully. Germany was not defeated. Germany defeated itself. I am simply helping to ensure that the knowledge survives, even though the regime did not. That's a convenient rationalization. Yes, but it is also true. Watson nods slowly. Fair enough. That evening, Verner receives a letter. It's been forwarded through 3 different military postal systems, and the envelope is battered and stained. But the return address makes his hands shake, Lechfeld, Germany. From Hartmann. He opens it in his apartment, sitting at the small kitchen table, and reads by lamplight. Hans, I do not know if this letter will reach you. I do not even know if you are alive. But I am writing because I must tell someone what we found when the Americans liberated Bavaria. Dachau was 12 kilometers from Lechfeld. 12 kilometers. We flew over it every day. We saw the smoke. We told ourselves it was industrial production. It was not industrial production. The Americans forced us to tour it after liberation. Made us see what had been there all along. Made us understand what we had chosen not to know. I cannot describe what I saw. I will not describe it. But I will tell you this. I am grateful that you surrendered when you did. I am grateful that you stopped participating before the end. I do not know if what you are doing in America is redemption, but it is better than what I am doing here, which is living 12 kilometers from a place I should have known about and didn't. If you can forgive yourself, I hope you will, because I cannot forgive myself, and I would not wish this feeling on anyone. Hartmann Verner reads the letter 3 times. Then he folds it carefully and places it in the drawer where he keeps his flight logs from Germany. Evidence. Testimony. Proof that the nightmares aren't just his imagination. The next day, he asks Watson for permission to make a statement for the official record. What kind of statement? Watson asks. About what I saw during the war. About the slave labor at Messerschmitt. About Auschwitz. Verner's voice is steady. I have been told that there are tribunals happening in Nuremberg. War crimes trials. I want my testimony to be available if needed. Watson sets down his coffee cup slowly. Hans, you understand that providing such testimony could make you a target? There are still Nazi sympathizers even in Allied custody. Speaking publicly about what you witnessed. I know the risks, but I also know that silence is complicity. Verner meets his eyes. I was silent during the war. I will not be silent after. The deposition takes 6 hours. 2 Army lawyers and a stenographer sit in a secure conference room while Verner describes everything he witnessed between 1941 and 1944. The slave laborers at Messerschmitt. The smoke over Auschwitz. The casual way engineers discussed which concentration camps provided the best workers. The burned Me-262 that taught him the Reich valued secrets over people. He speaks in German, translated sentence by sentence. The stenographer's fingers never stop moving. The lawyers ask clarifying questions, requesting dates and locations and names. Verner provides everything he can remember, knowing that memory is fallible, but testimony is necessary. When it's finished, one of the lawyers, a major named Greenspan, shakes his hand. This will be part of the official record, Greenspan says. It may be used in future tribunals. It will definitely be classified and archived. Will it matter? Verner asks. I don't know, Greenspan admits. But it's the truth, and the truth always matters eventually. April 1946. Watson informs him that his contract is being extended another 3 years. The Air Force, we're calling it the Air Force now, not Army Air Forces, wants to keep you on staff indefinitely, Watson explains. You'd transition from contractor to civil service employee. Better pay, better benefits, path to citizenship if you want it. Citizenship. American citizenship. It's part of the paperclip program. Specialists who prove valuable can apply after 5 years of service. Watson slides the paperwork across his desk. You'd have to renounce German citizenship, swear an oath to the Constitution, the whole process. But it's an option. Verner looks at the forms. Name, date of birth, country of origin. A bureaucratic transformation from enemy alien to American citizen accomplished through signatures and stamps. I will consider it, he says. That night he dreams again. But this time, the dream is different. He's still in the Bf 109, still falling. But when he looks down, the field below isn't covered in bodies. It's just a field. Snow-covered. Empty. Waiting. He wakes up at dawn and makes his decision. May 1946. In Dr. Kellerman's office, Verner talks about the future for the first time instead of the past. I am going to accept American citizenship, he says, when I am eligible. What changed your mind? I realize that being German means carrying responsibility for what Germany did. And I cannot carry that responsibility while also building a new life. Verner pauses. So, I will be American instead, and I will carry different responsibilities. That's not redemption, Kellerman warns gently. Changing citizenship doesn't erase what happened. I know, but it allows me to move forward instead of only looking backward. Verner looks out the window at the flight line. I cannot undo my silence, but I can refuse to be silent about what I know now, and I can use my knowledge to serve a country that does not build aircraft on top of corpses. Is that enough? No, but it is something, and something is better than nothing. Kellerman smiles for the first time in their sessions. That's the sanest thing anyone's said to me all month. By summer, Verner's role at Wright Field has evolved beyond test pilot. He's become a consultant on Soviet aviation, a lecturer on German engineering philosophy, a bridge between American present and German past. He teaches classes on jet propulsion theory. He reviews technical reports from occupied Germany. He helps interview other German specialists being brought to America under Operation Paperclip. One of those specialists is Dr. Wilhelm Messner, a propulsion engineer who worked at BMW developing jet engines. Verner sits in on his initial interview. Messner is 45, gray-haired, nervous. He answers questions about turbine blade metallurgy and combustion chamber design. His knowledge is encyclopedic. His morality is absent. During a break, Verner asks him directly, "Did you know about the slave labor?" Messner's face closes off. "I was an engineer. I designed engines. What happened in the factories was not my concern." "But you knew." "Everyone knew." Messner's voice drops. "But what could we do?" "Speak out and be sent to Dachau ourselves. We had families. We had careers. We did what we had to do to survive." Verner feels his hands clench. "And that makes it acceptable." "No, but it makes it understandable." Messner meets his eyes. "You flew those aircraft, Hans. You tested engines built by slave labor. Are you so different from me?" The question haunts Verner for weeks. Because Messner is right, they're not different. They both participated. They both remained silent. The only difference is that Verner admitted his complicity, and Messner is still justifying his. In his next session with Kellerman, Verner asks, "How do I work alongside people who refuse to acknowledge what they enabled? Do you have to work alongside them?" "Yes, the Air Force needs their knowledge, just like they need mine." Kellerman considers this. "Then, you maintain professional relationships while refusing to accept their rationalizations. You can work with someone without validating their choices. And if that makes me a hypocrite, then you're a hypocrite with principles, which is better than someone with no principles at all." It's not a satisfying answer, but it's honest. And honesty, Verner has learned, is the only currency that retains value after everything else burns. By autumn, Verner has flown 68 different aircraft for the Americans. He's written over 500 pages of technical analysis. He's provided testimony that will sit in classified archives for decades. He's begun the process of becoming Americans slowly transforming from enemy to immigrant. One October evening, Watson finds him on the flight line watching the sunset. "You've been here almost 2 years, Watson says. Ever regret it?" Verner thinks about Hartman's letter, about the bodies he didn't see but knew were there, about the Me-262 burning to protect secrets that should have been exposed, about the choice he made in December 1944 to bank west instead of east. "I regret that the choice was necessary," he finally says, "but I do not regret the choice itself." That's honest. Honesty is all I have left. They stand in silence as darkness settles over right field. Somewhere in the distance, an engine starts another test pilot, beginning another flight, pushing against darkness to find the limits of what's possible. And Verner understands finally what Dr. Kellerman meant about using knowledge for something meaningful. He can't undo his silence during the war. He can't save the people who died while he flew overhead. He can't erase his complicity, but he can ensure that their deaths aren't compounded by strategic ignorance. He can provide knowledge that keeps future pilots alive. He can speak truth to power instead of maintaining convenient silence. He can transform from someone who served a regime built on murder into someone who serves a nation that, despite its flaws, doesn't systematically exterminate its own people. It's not redemption. Redemption requires forgiveness, and Verner hasn't forgiven himself. But it's survival with purpose. And in the wreckage of 1946, with Europe in ruins and his homeland divided, purpose is enough to keep flying. In the files that were built to silence knowledge, in the archives designed to bury uncomfortable truths, the testimony survives. The depositions, the technical reports, the honest assessment of complicity and consequence. Future historians will find them. Future generations will learn from them. And somewhere in that future, the silence will finally end, not because monsters confessed, but because ordinary people chose to speak truth, even when it implicated themselves. The letter arrives in November 1946, forwarded through channels that shouldn't exist, but do anyway. No return address. Postmarked from Frankfurt. Inside a single page written in careful German script. Hans. They are looking for you. Not officially, not through military channels. But there are people, former SS, former Gestapo, who remember that you surrendered voluntarily. They remember that you testified. They have called you a traitor in publications that circulate in the displaced persons camps. I am telling you this because you saved my life once during that emergency landing near Munich in 1943. You did not have to pull me from that burning cockpit, but you did. Now I am repaying the debt. Do not come back to Germany. There is nothing here for you but revenge. A friend, Verner, reads the letter twice, then burns it in his apartment sink. Watson doesn't need to know about threats from ghosts. But that night, the nightmares return with new intensity. This time when he falls, there are faces waiting below. Faces he recognizes from Lechfeld, from Messerschmitt, from every airfield where silence was currency, and looking away was survival. In the morning, he makes a decision. He finds Watson in the flight test office, reviewing performance data from a new jet prototype. "I want to accelerate my citizenship application," Verner says without preamble. Watson looks up, reading something in Verner's expression. "What happened?" "Nothing. Everything." Verner sits down heavily. "I received information that suggests returning to Germany would be unwise. I need to know that America is not temporary refuge. I need to know that I belong somewhere." "You've only been here 2 years. Standard process is 5. "I am aware, but I am also aware that exceptions can be made for specialists deemed valuable to national security." Verner meets Watson's eyes. "Am I valuable enough for an exception?" Watson is quiet for a long moment. Then he picks up his phone. "Give me 24 hours. The call comes through channels Verner doesn't fully understand. Pentagon to State Department to Immigration. Within a week, he's sitting in a federal office in Columbus, Ohio, taking an oath he's memorized phonetically because the English still trips him up sometimes. I hereby declare on oath that I absolutely and entirely renounce and abjure all allegiance and fidelity to any foreign prince, potentate, state, or sovereignty. He thinks about what he's renouncing. Not just Germany as a nation, but everything it represented. The certainty of youth, the pride of expertise, the comfortable lie that technical skill exists separate from moral consequence, that I will support and defend the Constitution and laws of the United States of America against all enemies, foreign and domestic. He thinks about enemies, the ones he fought, the ones he became, the ones he's trying not to be anymore, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same. Faith, allegiance, words he's broken before and is swearing to uphold again. But this time, he tells himself it's different. This time, he's choosing allegiance to a system that allows him to speak truth, not one that punishes it. So help me God, God. Verner stopped believing in somewhere between 1943 and 1945, when the smoke over Auschwitz became impossible to explain as divine plan. But he says the words anyway, because oaths matter even when the entities they invoke don't. The clerk hands him a certificate. Congratulations, Mr. Verner. You're an American citizen. Mr. Verner. Not Oberleutnant. Not test pilot. Just a civilian with papers proving he belongs somewhere. It should feel like victory. Instead, it feels like amputation, cutting away part of himself to save the rest. That evening, Watson takes him to a bar off base where military personnel drink without uniforms, and rank doesn't matter beyond the door. How does it feel? Watson asks, sliding a bourbon across the table. Strange, like I am wearing someone else's identity. Verner drinks. The burn is familiar now, American. I keep expecting someone to revoke it, to say there was a mistake and I must return to being enemy alien. That's not going to happen. You're one of us now. Am I? Verner sets down his glass. I speak English with accent. I think in German. When I calculate aerodynamics, the equations are in metric. I am American on paper, but in my head, I am still... He stops searching for words. I am still the person who flew over Auschwitz and said nothing. Watson doesn't offer platitudes. He's learned that Verner doesn't want comfort, just honesty. Then be the person who says something now. You've given testimony. You've provided knowledge. You've refused to protect secrets that should have been exposed. That's not redemption, but it's something. Something, Verner echoes. Yes, always something. Never enough, but something. They drink in silence. Around them, other men laugh and argue and tell stories. Normal people with normal guilts, not the kind that wake you at 3 a.m., wondering how many people died so you could fly slightly faster aircraft. December 1946. Verner receives clearance to work on a new project analyzing Soviet aviation capabilities based on intelligence gathered from occupied Germany. The work requires him to review documents captured from Luftwaffe headquarters, including files he helped create. He finds his own reports in the archives. Technical assessments of the Me-262 from 1944. Recommendations for improving engine reliability that were marked defeatist pessimism, file, and ignore. Letters to the Reich Air Ministry explaining that jet propulsion required materials Germany no longer possessed, responded to with threats of investigation for undermining morale. Reading his own words from 2 years ago feels like examining artifacts from a dead civilization. This is what he was, a man who told truth to power and was punished for it. This is what he became, a man who stopped telling truth and became complicit through silence. Watson finds him in the archive room at midnight, surrounded by German documents. You okay? I am reading my own obituary. Verner gestures at the files. These reports were correct. Every warning I gave was accurate. If they had listened, perhaps the Me-262 program would have succeeded. Perhaps Germany would have prolonged the war. Perhaps more people would have died. He looks up. I am grateful they did not listen. But I am also angry that they punished me for being right. That's the Reich for you. Ideology over reality. Yes, but also. Verner struggles with the English. Also, it is every system that values loyalty over truth. Every organization that shoots the messenger. This is not uniquely German problem. This is human problem. Watson pulls up a chair. Is that what you tell yourself, that you were just a victim of systematic dysfunction? No, I tell myself that I was complicit in systematic dysfunction. Verner closes the file. The system was evil, but I participated in it. Both things are true. And now I work for different system. Better system. Not perfect system, but one that does not build aircraft on top of corpses. Verner stands gathering documents. And I make sure that the knowledge survives, even though the regime did not. Because knowledge does not have nationality. Only application does. January 1947. A new assignment arrives. The Air Force wants Verner to travel to occupied Germany as part of a technical intelligence team. The mission interview remaining Luftwaffe engineers and evaluate captured aircraft that are too damaged to transport to America. You don't have to accept, Watson says. I can request someone else. But Verner knows this is inevitable. He's the bridge between American present and German past. The man who speaks both languages understands both systems and can translate technical knowledge across the boundary of defeat. I will go, he says, but I have conditions. Name them. I travel as American civilian, not as former Luftwaffe officer. I report to you, not to German authorities, and I will not enter any location where former Nazi officials have authority. Agreed. The flight to Germany takes 14 hours across the Atlantic in a military transport. Verner sits in the cargo bay surrounded by crates of supplies and correspondence. Other passengers, Army personnel, diplomatic staff, contractors, ignore him. He's just another specialist in a plane full of specialists, all of them flying toward a country that exists only in ruins. They land at Rhine-Main Air Base in Frankfurt. February 1947. 2 years since Germany surrendered. The city beyond the airfield is skeletal. Buildings reduced to facades, rubble cleared into neat piles. People moving through streets like ghosts, heads down, eyes avoiding contact. Verner's escort is a lieutenant named Morrison, 24 years old, who speaks no German and treats occupied Germany like an extended camping trip. They drive through Frankfurt in a Jeep, Morrison providing cheerful commentary about reconstruction efforts, while Verner watches his former country slide past the window. This is what defeat looks like. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just exhausted people trying to survive winter in buildings without roofs. Their first destination is Oberursel, where American intelligence has established an interrogation center in a former Luftwaffe facility. The irony isn't lost on Verner. He's returning to a German military base as an American employee interviewing Germans who served the same regime he did. The first engineer they interview is Dr. Friedrich Clausen, former chief designer at Junkers. He's 58, gaunt, wearing a civilian suit that's been mended so many times the original fabric is barely visible. Morrison conducts the interview in English, with Verner translating. But after 10 minutes, Verner realizes Clausen is giving carefully sanitized answers, technical truth, with moral evasion. Dr. Clausen, Verner says in German, dropping the translation pretense. I am Hans Verner. I was test pilot at Lechfeld. I flew the aircraft you designed, and I need you to stop lying about what you knew. Clausen's face goes pale. I am not lying. I provided technical information. You provided information about aerodynamics and propulsion, but you have not mentioned the slave labor at your factories. You have not mentioned that workers were dying while building your aircraft. Verner leans forward. I am not asking for confession. I am asking for truth, because I was also complicit, and I am trying to understand how we all participated in something monstrous. The room is silent except for Morrison's confused, "What's going on?" Clausen's hands shake. What do you want me to say? That I knew, Everyone knew. But what was I supposed to do? Refuse to work and be sent to the camps myself? Speak out and condemn my family? His voice rises. I did what I had to do to survive. We all did. And that makes it acceptable? No, but it makes it understandable. Clausen's eyes are hollow. You surrendered, Hans. You saved yourself. The rest of us did not have that option. We stayed and we participated and we watched people die, and now you come here with your American citizenship and your moral clarity and you judge us. But where is the difference? You flew the aircraft. I designed them. We are both complicit. Verner translates the conversation for Morrison, who listens with growing discomfort. Jesus, Morrison mutters. This is above my pay grade. They interview 6 more engineers over the next week. Each conversation follows the same pattern: technical truth wrapped in moral evasion. Everyone knew. No one could speak. Survival required participation. The Reich made monsters of ordinary men by making monstrosity the price of existence. And Verner understands with crystalline clarity why he can't come back to Germany. Not because of threats from former SS, but because staying here means drowning in collective guilt that has no resolution, only endless justification. On the 8th day, they visit Dachau. Verner didn't request this. Morrison's commanding officer added it to the itinerary, believing that technical personnel should understand the context of their work. The phrase makes Verner want to vomit, but he doesn't protest. The camp is empty now, converted into a displaced persons facility. But the infrastructure remains. The barracks, the crematorium, the roll call square where prisoners stood for hours in winter cold, while guards decided who lived another day. Morrison walks through with clinical detachment, reading from an information sheet prepared by Army intelligence. Opened in 1933. Initially for political prisoners, expanded during the war, estimated 200,000 prisoners total, over 40,000 deaths documented, actual number likely higher. Verner stands in the roll call square and does the mathematics automatically. Dachau to Lechfeld, 12 kilometers. Flight time at cruising speed, 3 minutes. He flew over this place hundreds of times. Saw the smoke. Told himself it was industrial production. You okay? Morrison asks. No. Verner's voice is flat. I am 12 kilometers from where I tested aircraft for 5 years. I flew over this place. I saw the smoke. I did nothing. You didn't know. I knew enough. Everyone knew enough. Verner turns to face Morrison. This is what Clausen meant. This is what all of them mean when they say, what could we do? We could have known. We chose not to. Morrison doesn't respond. What response is adequate? They stand in silence while cold wind cuts across the empty square. That evening, Verner writes a letter to Dr. Kellerman. Not for response, just for confession. I have seen Dachau. I understand now that my nightmares were not imagination, but incomplete memory. The bodies I dream about falling toward, they were real. They were here. And I flew over them for years telling myself I did not know. Clausen asked where the difference is between his complicity and mine. I told him I chose to stop participating. But the truth is, I only stopped because my engine failed. If that DB-605 had kept running, would I have surrendered? Or would I have returned to Lechfeld and continued testing aircraft built by slave labor? I do not know. And not knowing is worse than knowing. I would have continued. Because it means my moral awakening required mechanical failure, not moral courage. Is that redemption? Or just luck? He doesn't mail the letter. Instead, he burns it, watching the paper curl and blacken in the hotel room ashtray. Some truths are too heavy to send through postal systems. The technical mission continues for another month. They travel to Recklinlerz, where the Luftwaffe conducted flight testing. To Peenemünde, where rockets were developed by Wernher von Braun, using slave labor from Mittelbau-Dora. To Munich, where BMW's jet engine facility sits empty and looted. At each location, Verner provides technical assessment while carrying the weight of moral knowledge. The aircraft were innovative. The factories were graveyards. Both facts are true simultaneously. In March, they returned to Frankfurt for final debriefing. Verner's report runs 312 pages detailed technical analysis of every aircraft and facility they examined, cross-referenced with production records and prisoner testimony. It's comprehensive, it's accurate. It's evidence of innovation built on atrocity. Morrison reads the executive summary and whistles. This is going to make a lot of people uncomfortable. Good, Verner says. Comfort is what allowed this to happen. Everyone was comfortable not knowing. The flight back to America feels like resurrection. Leaving Germany isn't escape. It's acknowledgement that he can't carry German guilt and American future simultaneously. He must choose. And he's already chosen back in December 1944, when his engine failed and he banked west. Watson meets him at Wright Field with coffee and bureaucratic efficiency. Your report's been classified top secret. The technical portions will be distributed to appropriate departments. The other portions will be archived. The portions about slave labor. Yes. Why classify them? Why not make them public? Watson's expression is carefully neutral. Because the Air Force needs German engineers. Operation Paperclip is bringing over 200 specialists. If we start emphasizing their complicity, it becomes harder to justify their employment. Verner sets down his coffee, feeling cold, settle into his bones despite the heated office. So we will use their knowledge and ignore how it was obtained. We'll document how it was obtained, but we won't prosecute unless there's direct evidence of war crimes. Watson meets his eyes. I don't like it either, but it's policy. Policy. Verner tastes the word like poison. Policy required me to fly over Dachau and say nothing. Policy required Clausen to use slave labor and call it production efficiency. Policy is how evil becomes systematic. I know. Do you? Because from where I am sitting, American policy is now protecting the people who enabled atrocity in exchange for technical advantage. Verner stands. I thought I was working for better system, but perhaps I am just working for different system with similar pragmatism. Watson doesn't argue, can't argue, because Verner is right, and they both know it. That night, Verner sits in his apartment and thinks about the cost of knowledge. Every technical insight he's provided came from experience gained while flying over death camps. Every engineering principle he's explained was developed using slave labor. Every advantage America gains from German expertise is built on the bodies of people who died creating it. The knowledge itself is neutral, but its origins are not. And using that knowledge without acknowledging its source feels like compounding the original sin. He thinks about Clausen's question, where is the difference? The difference, Verner decides, is in what happens next. He can't undo his complicity. Can't save the people who died, can't make German engineers confess their guilt if American policy protects them from consequence. But he can speak truth, can document, can ensure that future historians know exactly how this knowledge was obtained and at what cost, can refuse to let comfortable lies replace uncomfortable truth. In the morning, he writes a letter to Watson, not a resignation, a condition. I will continue working as technical consultant. But I will not remain silent about the origins of German aviation knowledge. If the Air Force classifies my testimony about slave labor, I will seek other venues to provide it. I will speak to historians, to journalists, to anyone who will document how innovation was built on atrocity. You can fire me for this. You can revoke my security clearance. But you cannot make me complicit through silence again. I already made that choice once, and it cost me the right to sleep without nightmares. I am American now, and I will behave like American, loudly insisting on uncomfortable truths, even when policy prefers comfortable lies. He delivers the letter personally. Watson reads it without expression, then looks up. You're going to make your career very difficult. I am aware. And you're okay with that? No. But I am okay with being difficult person who tells truth more than I am okay with being comfortable person who stays silent. Watson nods slowly, then extends his hand. Then welcome to America, Hans. This is exactly the kind of principled stubbornness that makes this country work even when it's annoying as hell. They shake hands. And Verner understands finally what citizenship means. Not just papers and oaths, but the right, the obligation to speak truth to power, even when power would prefer silence. Freedom has arrived. Not perfect freedom. Not freedom from guilt or consequence, but freedom to acknowledge both without being executed for honesty. It's too late for the thousands who died while he flew overhead, too late for the engineers who participated and justified, too late for the comfortable lie that technical skill exists separate from moral choice. But it's not too late to document, to testify, to ensure that knowledge survives with its full context intact, origins acknowledged rather than sanitized. And in the files that will outlast them all, the truth is preserved not because it's comfortable, but because it's necessary. The innovation, the atrocity, the complicity, the cost, all of it, together. The way history actually happened, not the way policy wishes it had. Watson's response comes not through official channels, but over drinks at the same off-base bar where they celebrated Verner's citizenship. The brass read your letter, Watson says, setting down 2 bourbons. There was a lot of shouting. Some talk about revoking your clearance. One colonel suggested you be shipped back to Germany as culturally incompatible with American interests. Verner drinks. The bourbon doesn't taste like victory. And General Stratton, he runs the Technical Intelligence Division, said something that shut everyone up. Watson pauses. He said if we punish people for insisting on historical accuracy, we're no better than the regime we just defeated. The German stays. His testimony stays. And anyone who has a problem with uncomfortable truths can transfer to a different department. So I am keeping my job. You're keeping your job, your clearance, your annoying insistence on documentation. Watson raises his glass. Welcome to the American tradition of protected dissent. It's messy as hell, but it's ours. They drink to that, to messiness, to the right to be difficult, to a system that, despite its flaws and pragmatic compromises, allows truth to exist alongside power instead of being executed by it. But Verner knows that keeping his job means continuing to work alongside men like Messner, the BMW engineer, who still justifies slave labor as unfortunate necessity. Means watching Operation Paperclip bring more German specialists to America, while their complicity is classified and archived rather than prosecuted and publicized. The moral compromise gnaws at him. But the alternative silence, resignation, walking away, feels worse. At least by staying, he can document, can testify, can ensure that the full context is preserved even if policy requires it to be classified. May 1947. Verner receives an invitation that arrives on official letterhead from the Nuremberg military tribunals. They want him to testify in the prosecution of industrialists who used slave labor. Specifically, they want his testimony about aircraft production at Messerschmitt and BMW facilities. He shows the letter to Watson, who reads it twice before speaking. You understand what this means. You'll be testifying against people you worked with. Some of them are being brought to America under paperclip. If you implicate them publicly, it creates problems for the program. I am aware. And you still want to do it. I must do it. Because if I do not, then my silence in 1944 was not interrupted by moral awakening. It was just temporarily suspended by mechanical failure. Verner meets Watson's eyes. I need to know that I chose to stop being complicit. Not that circumstances forced me to stop. Watson nods slowly. Then you have my support. And probably a lot of angry phone calls from Washington. The journey to Nuremberg takes 3 days by military transport. Verner travels with a State Department escort named Catherine Brennan, a lawyer who specializes in war crimes prosecution. She briefs him on the trial proceedings during the flight. The defendants are industrialists who profited from slave labor. Brennan explains. We're not prosecuting the engineers directly. Most of them claim they were following orders. But the factory owners, the production managers, the people who requisitioned prisoners from concentration camps, those are the targets. And my testimony will help convict them. Your testimony will establish that technical personnel knew about the slave labor and that the aircraft they produced were dependent on it. Brennan's voice is precise legal. You're not testifying about guilt. You're testifying about knowledge, that everyone knew and everyone participated anyway. Nuremberg in May 1947 is a city trying to forget what it was. The rally grounds where Hitler spoke to hundreds of thousands now host military tribunals judging his accomplices. The Palace of Justice, miraculously undamaged by bombing, serves as courthouse for the systematic prosecution of systematic evil. Verner sits in a witness waiting room for 2 hours before being called. Through the walls, he hears muffled voices, prosecutors, defense attorneys, translators, rendering German atrocity into English testimony. The language of evil, he thinks, is always bureaucratic, always sanitized, always hiding behind euphemism and procedure. When they call his name, he walks into a courtroom filled with the formal machinery of justice. Judges in robes, lawyers at tables, defendants in the dock, middle-aged men in suits who look like accountants, not architects of murder. The prosecutor is an American major named Donnelly. He establishes Verner's credentials: first, Luftwaffe test pilot, 247 hours of flight time experience with all major German aircraft types. Then he begins the real questions. Mr. Verner, during your time at Lechfeld Airfield and Messerschmitt facilities, did you observe prisoners being used as labor? Yes. Can you describe what you observed? Verner looks at the defendants. One of them, a man named Hartung, who managed production at a Messerschmitt factory, stares back with undisguised contempt. Verner recognizes him. They met in 1943 when Verner complained about aircraft quality issues. Hartung had said, "The workers are doing their best with available materials." He never mentioned that the workers were starving prisoners from Dachau. I observed prisoners in striped uniforms assembling aircraft components. Verner testifies in German, translated sentence by sentence. They were malnourished. Many appeared ill. Guards supervised with weapons. This was at multiple facilities between 1941 and 1944. Did you report these observations to anyone? I mentioned them to an engineer in 1943. He told me not to ask questions. Verner pauses. I did not ask questions after that. Why not? Because asking questions about prisoner labor was classified as defeatist talk. 3 engineers at Messerschmitt were arrested by the Gestapo in 1944 for raising concerns about production methods. I wanted to survive, so I stopped asking. The courtroom is silent. Even the defendants seem to understand what Verner is confessing, not just their guilt, but his own. He's not here as innocent witness. He's here as participant who chose to stop participating. Donnelly continues. In your professional opinion, as a test pilot, were the aircraft you flew dependent on prisoner labor for their production? Yes. By 1943, the Luftwaffe could not maintain production without concentration camp labor. The regular workforce had been conscripted into military service. Prisoners replaced them. Without prisoners, there would have been no aircraft. And did technical personnel like yourself, pilots, engineers, designers, know this? Everyone knew. Verner looks directly at Hartung. Some acknowledged it privately. Some justified it as necessary. Some, like me, said nothing because saying something was dangerous, but everyone knew. The defense attorney, a German named Sievers, cross-examines with predictable strategy. Mr. Verner, you testified that speaking out was dangerous. Were the defendants not also in danger if they refused to use prisoner labor? Perhaps. Then how can you judge them for doing what you yourself did, remaining silent to survive? Verner considers the question. It's the same one Clausen asked, The same one Messner implied, the same one that haunts him at 3 a.m. when the nightmares come. I cannot judge them for remaining silent, he finally says. I can only testify that they knew what they were participating in. What they did with that knowledge, whether they felt guilt, whether they tried to resist, whether they justified it as necessity, that is for this court to determine. I am here only to confirm that the knowledge existed, that we all knew, and that none of us can claim ignorance as defense. It's not the answer Sievers wanted, but it's honest, and honesty is all Verner has to offer. The testimony lasts 6 hours across 2 days. Other witnesses follow survivors' liberation soldiers, allied investigators. The evidence accumulates like sediment, layer after layer of documented atrocity. By the end, the verdict is foregone. Several defendants receive prison sentences. 2 receive death sentences that will later be commuted. None of them express remorse. Hartung specifically makes a statement before sentencing that crystallizes everything Verner has been struggling to articulate. I did what was necessary for Germany, Hartung says. I used the resources available to maintain production during wartime. If those resources included prison labor, that was the decision of higher authorities. I was a manager, not a policymaker. I followed orders and fulfilled my duty to the nation. The judges deliberate for 17 minutes before sentencing him to 12 years imprisonment. Afterward, Brennan finds Verner in the Palace of Justice hallway. That was good testimony, she says. Honest, difficult, exactly what we needed. Did it matter? Verner asks. Will any of this matter? I don't know, but it's documented now, the knowledge, the complicity, the systematic nature of it. She pauses. That's what justice is in cases like this, not punishment that fits the crime, because no punishment can but documentation that prevents the crime from being forgotten or denied. Verner thinks about that as he walks out of the Palace of Justice into Nuremberg Spring. Documentation as justice. Memory as resistance. The truth preserved even when convenient lies would be more comfortable. It's not enough, but it's something. The return flight to America takes 4 days due to weather delays. Verner spends the time reading through trial transcripts that Brennan provided, other cases, other testimonies, the accumulated evidence of systematic murder dressed in bureaucratic language. One transcript stops him cold. It's testimony from a Dachau survivor named Samuel Klein describing liberation in April 1945. We heard aircraft overhead all through the war, every day. German fighters going up, American bombers coming in. We knew there was a world beyond the wire, a world where people flew through the sky while we died on the ground. Some prisoners hated the pilots. Said they were complicit flying over us, seeing the smoke, doing nothing. But I never hated them. I understood. They were trying to survive same as us. The difference was, their survival didn't require watching children die. Verner reads the passage 4 times. Klein is right, the difference between pilot and prisoner wasn't moral superiority. It was circumstance. Verner's survival required looking away. Klein's survival required enduring what couldn't be looked away from. And yet Klein doesn't hate him, doesn't condemn, just understands that everyone was trying to survive in a system designed to make survival require complicity. When the plane lands at Wright Field, Watson is waiting with coffee and a cautious expression. How was Nuremberg? Necessary. Insufficient. Documented. Verner accepts the coffee. I testified. They were convicted. Nothing changes except now the truth is in official records instead of just classified files. That's not nothing. No, but it is not justice either. Just accountability, which is better than silence, but worse than prevention. They drive back to the base in Watson's car through Ohio farmland that looks nothing like Bavaria, but reminds Verner of it anyway. Every landscape is haunted when you carry the right ghosts. Over the next 2 years, Verner continues his work at Wright Field, testing aircraft, analyzing Soviet aviation developments, providing technical consultation to engineers who increasingly forget that he was ever Luftwaffe, ever enemy, ever anything except colleague. His role evolves. He's no longer just test pilot or technical consultant. He becomes an educator teaching courses on comparative aviation engineering at the Air Force Institute of Technology. His lectures are popular not because he makes German engineering seem superior, but because he explains why it failed, despite its innovations. The Me-262 was faster than any Allied fighter, he tells a classroom of young officers in 1949. But speed does not win wars. Reliability wins wars. Maintainability wins wars. Industrial capacity wins wars. The Me-262 required specialized tools, rare materials, and expert mechanics. The P-51 required standard tools, common materials, and adequate mechanics. Which one do you think won? A student raises his hand. But if Germany had more resources, then Germany would have lost 6 months later instead of when it did. Verner interrupts. Because the fundamental problem was not resources. It was philosophy. German engineering optimized for individual performance. American engineering optimized for system performance. In total war systems, defeat individuals every time. The lectures become part of Air Force curriculum. Verner's insights, purchased through years of flying for a losing side shape, how a generation of American pilots understand the relationship between technology and strategy. But the teaching isn't redemption. It's documentation, ensuring that the lessons survive even if the people who learn them die. In 1950, Verner receives a letter from Germany. It's from Hartmann, not the Nuremberg defendant, but the Lechfeld crew chief with one arm and a clipboard. The one who survived the war and wrote that first warning letter about Dachau. Hans, I am writing because I read in a newspaper that you testified at Nuremberg. The article called you a traitor. I want you to know that you are not a traitor. You are the only honest man I served with during the entire war. I am working now at a technical college in Munich, teaching aircraft maintenance. I tell my students what I should have told myself in 1943, technical skill without moral judgment is not expertise. It is complicity. Some students understand, some do not. But I keep teaching, same as you keep testifying, because what else can we do except try to ensure the next generation knows what we learned too late. Thank you for having the courage I did not have. Thank you for surrendering when the rest of us kept flying. Hartmann Verner folds the letter carefully and places it in a drawer with his other documents. Evidence. Testimony. The accumulated proof that knowledge existed, that choices were made, that silence was never innocence. That evening, he writes a response. Not a letter to mail, but a statement for his own records, the kind of testimony that will sit in archives long after he's dead. I am asked sometimes if I regret surrendering, if I regret testifying, if I regret speaking uncomfortable truths about complicity and choice. I do not regret these things, but I regret that they were necessary. I regret that my moral awakening required engine failure rather than moral courage. I regret every flight I made over Dachau, every aircraft I tested that was built by prisoners, every moment I chose personal survival over collective responsibility. But regret without action is just self-indulgence. So I testify, I teach, I document. I ensure that the truth survives in archives and classrooms and official records, even when policy would prefer comfortable lies. This is not redemption. Redemption requires forgiveness, and I have not forgiven myself. This is something smaller. The refusal to compound original sin with continued silence. The insistence that knowledge has consequences, and that those consequences must be acknowledged rather than classified. I flew for Germany. I surrendered to America. I testified at Nuremberg. And through all of it, I learned one truth that transcends nationality: the sky belongs to no one. It doesn't care about flags or ideologies or which side of history you happen to occupy. The sky only cares if you're honest about what you see from it. And I saw smoke rising from Dachau for years before I admitted what I was looking at. That is my confession. That is my testimony. That is the knowledge I can offer to anyone who asks technical skill is not morality, and silence is not innocence. And the difference between complicity and courage is often just one decision made when your engine fails and you must choose which direction to glide. I chose West. I chose testimony. I chose uncomfortable truth over comfortable lies. And I will die someday knowing that I was complicit, that I survived through luck rather than virtue, that my redemption is incomplete and probably impossible. But I will also die knowing that I documented the truth, that I testified, despite consequences, that I refused to let knowledge be sanitized or complicity be forgotten. That is not enough. But it is something. And in the end, something is all any of us can offer. He files the statement with his other documents. Future historians will find it. Future generations will judge it. And somewhere in that future, the full accounting will finally be possible. Not justice, which requires the dead to be resurrected, but accountability, which requires the living to remember. The years pass. The Cold War intensifies. Verner continues his work analyzing Soviet aircraft, teaching comparative engineering, providing consultation on jet propulsion and aerodynamic theory. He publishes technical papers under his American name. He becomes gradually just another aviation expert, his German past acknowledged, but not defining his Luftwaffe service a biographical footnote rather than disqualifying fact. In 1955, Watson retires from active duty and joins a civilian aerospace company. Before he leaves, he takes Verner to their usual bar for a final drink. 10 years, Watson says, raising his bourbon. 10 years since we met. You were a German prisoner. I was supposed to interrogate you. Now you're an American citizen teaching our pilots, and I'm going to work for Lockheed. Hell of a decade. Hell of a decade, Verner echoes. Any regrets? Verner considers the question. He's considered it many times over 10 years. I regret that my country built aircraft on corpses. I regret that I flew them. I regret that I said nothing until my engine forced me to say something. But I do not regret surrendering, and I do not regret testifying. That's honest. Honesty is all I have left. Verner smiles slightly. You taught me that. You taught me that telling uncomfortable truths is American tradition. And you taught me that technical knowledge has moral weight, that you can't separate how something was learned from what was learned. Watson sets down his glass. You've been good for the Air Force, Hans. More importantly, you've been good for the country. We need people who insist on uncomfortable truths even when policy would prefer convenient lies. They drink to that, to uncomfortable truths, to documentation over denial, to the stubborn insistence that knowledge must include context, even when context is damning. A month later, Verner receives a package from Germany. Inside is a photograph, the memorial at Dachau, newly constructed, bearing the inscription, "Never Again," in multiple languages. Attached is a note from Hartmann. They built this to remember, so that the smoke we saw and ignored will never be forgotten, so that future generations will know what we were complicit in. I do not know if monuments can prevent evil, but I know that forgetting enables it. So we build monuments, and we testify, and we teach, hoping that memory itself becomes resistance. Verner places the photograph on his desk at Wright Field, where students and colleagues can see it. Some ask about it. He tells them, "This is where I flew overhead for 5 years and saw nothing." This is what happens when technical expertise operates without moral judgment. This is why I teach that engineering is never neutral, that knowledge has consequences, that silence is never innocent. Some students understand, some don't. But he keeps teaching, same as Hartmann keeps teaching, because the alternative is letting the knowledge die with them. And the knowledge must survive. The complicity must be documented. The truth must be preserved in archives and classrooms and monuments, not because it brings the dead back, but because it prevents their deaths from being meaningless. That is the only redemption available to people like Verner, ensuring that the knowledge survives complete context, included origins acknowledged, so that future engineers and pilots and citizens understand what happens when expertise divorces itself from morality, so that the next generation knows what they learned too late. so that the sky which belongs to no one can be conquered by people who understand that technical mastery without moral judgment is not achievement, it's complicity. And complicity, once acknowledged, can never be comfortable again. They built Dachau with hatred and systematic murder, but it is remembered with truth and stubborn documentation. The smoke that rose from it for years was industrial murder. The silence that surrounded it was collective complicity, and the testimony that now preserves it from survivors, from liberators, from complicit participants like Verner is the only justice possible for crimes that can never be adequately punished. If you believe these names must be remembered, share this story. Write a name in the comments, a victim, a survivor, a witness. Let memory be resistance. Let documentation be defiance. Let the truth survive even when comfortable lies are easier, because the sky belongs to no one, but the truth about what we see from it belongs to everyone, and that truth once spoken can never be unspoken again.